Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Carter, and I am the Executive Director of the Livermore Valley Performing Arts Center. Welcome to this interview today with Lara Webber, the Director of the Livermore-Amador Symphony. This is a part of a series of interviews we'll be doing with people around the community who are highly involved in the arts here in the Livermore Valley region. And I'm so pleased to have Lara here today with us. So you've been the director of the symphony now. I think you started right around the same time I started at the Bankhead Theater, about
We
5 or 6 years
started
ago.
basically at the same time.
Yeah.
Almost exactly.
So
Yep.
I want to know tell me a little bit more about your background and what's your story? So when did
What's my
you
story?
first did you take lessons as a child? Were your parents really into music? How did you go down this path?
Well, you could point to a lot of different catalysts for how I ended up being an orchestra conductor, but the one I always pick because it was the through line throughout was the fact that, frankly, I was the product of a public school music education that included music throughout, and opportunities to make music in the classroom, to make music in ensembles, to make music as a musical theater singer, actor. The arts were like in the curriculum. I was, to date myself, I was, a product of the 70s and early 80s in a school district that held on to those programs even when they were fighting for their lives back then. And yes, a very big influence from my parents. My mom is an opera singer and a voice teacher, and she was a single mom, and we had not a whole lot of financial resource, so my babysitter was really the opera house. So that is a huge influence on my upbringing, where I was just surrounded by musicians, and music was, a profession held by people I knew. And my dad, although I did not live with him all the time, whenever we were together, he was listening to big symphonic works on recording. So he'd wake me up in the morning with The Great Gate of Kiev or something from pictures at an exhibition, or some massive conclusion to a massive symphony that, if you were a teenager, would shake the rafters and get you out of bed. So that was really, I think, the driver towards orchestral music in a way. But I also played cello in orchestra in high school, and I played in a drum ensemble in a like non-Western music class in 5th grade, and I sang in my school musicals. All of that meant that by the time I got to college, the thing I wanted to do was somehow become a better musician and teach others how to be better musicians, or how to express themselves musically. And I went to Oberlin College and quickly learned that music education was not the avenue to conducting I should take if I was interested in being a conductor, but it did point me towards conducting. And I shifted that attention away to actually learning how to be a conductor, because people saw me work and said, "You're good at that and you should do that." So I
So,
had really good luck and good influences. And
well, tell me, where did you grow up? So where did you go to elementary
oh, I
school?
skipped that part. Seattle. I'm a Seattle.
Seattle. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a Pacific Northwesterner at heart.
Well, it's funny. Your story about your dad kind of reminds me when I was growing up. So my parents weren't really into a lot of symphonic music or anything, but my dad liked jazz music, and but every Sunday morning, for some reason, he has this Italian background, and he really wanted to listen to Enrico Caruso, and he had this one Enrico Caruso record, and so every Sunday we would have to listen to Enrico Caruso in the mornings. And it's a very old recording, and there's this famous song where he laughs. He does this laugh, and
Yes,
I can picture it. But that was my introduction to opera. Was my dad listening to Enrico Caruso every Sunday morning, which I really enjoyed it.
that's a voice unlike any other.
Yeah, it was kind of neat, and it was fun just to understand that even though something was written or performed so long ago, it doesn't mean it's not relevant, or you know, there's still always new ears to listen to it, which I always appreciated. But
Hmm.
so you went to Oberlin. Did you study music at Oberlin? What was your major?
Yeah, it's funny. I ended up at Oberlin sort of by accident. I had selected a different school for a different reason. I was going to be an actor. I was going to be a singing actor in musical theater and go to Broadway. I don't know what I was thinking. But for a lot of reasons, that decision became obviously wrong right in the middle of my freshman year. And of all the schools I had been accepted to, the only one that was even willing to let me change my mind and come in the middle of a freshman year was Oberlin, and that's literally the only reason I went. So it turned out to be a fateful, positive choice. Oberlin became a perfect incubator for me to figure out who I was and what I wanted to do. And I don't think it could have happened the same way anywhere else. But that's basically where I ended up studying, and the path formed from there.
And why? So why was it though that people encouraged you to get into conducting? So because you kind of said that people were
Yeah,
telling you there's something you could be good at. What was it about you that made that happen?
I don't think I know exactly. I was so concerned at the time with doing everything right, with getting it all right. Conducting is a preparing music of any kind to teach to a group and lead, whether you're a teacher, a conductor, is a daunting task. You're responsible for a bunch of people interpreting a piece of music in some uniform and coherent and meaningful way. So I was really worried about all of that. And I assumed that it had something to do with an ease that I definitely know I have in the moment of conducting and communicating, that my teacher at the time, a woman named Mallory Thompson, identified when I was just taking a conducting class as part of being a music education major, which a major I later dropped. But she took me aside after a class and said, she just looked at me square in the eyes and said, "You know you're good at this and you should do this. You should pursue this. You should
Hmm.
study this further." And my response was, "Well, I am not a child prodigy instrumentalist. I'm not a great, young virtuoso on the piano. I mean, all the great conductors I know came up in some other way. I'm a singer who wanted to be a theater major who ended up here by accident." And she said, "You can learn what you don't know." And she provided me with, she gave me an exam, basically. She said, "This is how all the instruments of the orchestra transpose. These are their ranges. This is what's hard for them. This is what's not," just sort of on a very general level. And she was trying to prove to me that I could learn the parts of this field that I believed I had no business pursuing, because my basic fundamental talent for the physicality of conducting, and more importantly, probably, I assume, the interpersonal aspects of leading a group of people through this abstract exercise of making music, like you said, written who knows when, but relevant now. So she just put me through my paces to show me that I could do this. And that's how
Oh,
that launched.
that sounds like a great teacher.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. And
so go
yeah,
ahead.
well, she was the prelude to another great teacher who was Robert Spano,
Hmm.
who is the outgoing music director of the Atlanta Symphony, came after her. And he was the sort of person that would just look at me, fold his arms, and say over his little John Lennon glasses, "If you want to be a conductor, there's only one way to learn, and that's to conduct.
Just do it.
Just do it, because you have to. It's like practicing your instrument. You can't. That's one of the things that's so hard about the pandemic. I am separated from my instrument,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
objectifies orchestral musicians in a way I don't mean to when I say that. But you can't, conductors are, it's a really weird space to be in. You need a collection of other musicians in order to practice your craft. You can do a lot of preparation in study and in your own development as a performer on another instrument, in watching rehearsals, all kinds of ways. But if the bottom line is to get better at conducting, you need to conduct. So
There you
that's
go.
tricky.
Well, you were kind of making me think. My own experience, and it's not. I wasn't never in a symphony or an orchestra, but when I was in high school, I was in the handbell choir of my church, and I'm fully admitting that now. I usually don't tell people that, but I really enjoyed it. And there was like 20 of us, and the thing that amazed me, I was on the bass clef. I had like four notes, but the thing that amazed me was the woman that directed us, was this wonderful woman. She could hear every single person, and she knew exactly who was screwing up. Usually it was me, but she knew, she could tell exactly who was doing something wrong and when they were doing it wrong, and her ears could hear everything. And so I just was curious. So when you're listening to the orchestra, can you pick out the instruments? If somebody's not playing something right, can you point it out and say it's, this particular instrument or this person, or they're not on the right beat, or can you hear all that?
So ideally, yes. But first, one other point, handbell choir experience is incredibly valuable. That's really hard because you're only playing like a few notes. So you have to know everyone else's part in order to know precisely when to play that note. It's kind of like a percussionist's role in the orchestra. It might seem like there's somebody back there for a really long time not doing anything, but they're having to track all of it. So bravo. That's great
Thanks.
ensemble experience.
Thank you.
So it really depends. In all honesty, throughout a sea of string players, for example, I cannot hear an individual player like who's sitting from within a large section. I cannot necessarily hear, oh, it's outside fourth stand, second violin who's flat on their F sharp or something. But obviously, a woodwind part, there's only one player on each part often. And so if a second clarinet line has a misprint in their part and they're playing the wrong note, it's my job to hear that and discern that. I freely admit imperfection here. There will be times when my attention is somewhere else and I will not notice if somebody has left something out or whatever. And there is an art to not just hearing if something's wrong, but knowing when it's your job to fix it and when it's your job to wait a minute and play it again and allow the musician to fix it. Because 9 times out of 10 in any orchestra, that individual player will know that they screwed up and get it right. And that empowers them and also avoids like unnecessary criticism. Of course, there is a point where I have to fix it, and if I'm not fixing it, I'm wasting everyone's time. So, but that's the trick. You really have to train. Listening is the number one job of any ensemble leader.
Well, and I assume you're not, because I hear some stories about conductors and they're like they could be really mean and they point people out, but you don't do any of that, right?
No, I'm probably not mean enough sometimes. It's not in my DNA. It just doesn't
Yeah.
happen. The first concert I ever conducted was at Oberlin, and it was following the advice of Robert Spano, my mentor at the time, who said, if you want to learn to conduct, conduct. And Oberlin, being an incubator for ideas, and everyone's trapped in a tiny town in Ohio, I put up a sign, and everybody showed up to play. And I had this wonderful ensemble of musicians that now populate orchestras all over the country and the world. Thank God for them tolerating me as a young, totally inexperienced conductor. And I went through a long process of producing my first concert on stage. I literally didn't know anything, Chris, nothing. I didn't know, like the day of the concert, I thought, wait, how does this work? I've seen a million concerts, but does the concertmaster go out and then I go out? Like, I really hadn't thought it through. So in any case, what happened after that concert had functioned and been successful, and the music making was good in large part because the musicians themselves just went through this process with me, and hopefully in some part due to my actual ability. But a really respected cellist, Norman Fisher, on the faculty of the Oberlin Conservatory at the time, he came up to me and he grabbed me by the shoulders and he said, Lara, you're a really good conductor. Don't lose your personality.
Wow.
And I said, what do you mean? Like, it shocked me. What do you mean, don't lose my personality? And he didn't answer me in the moment, but I went to him later and I said, what did you mean? What is your concern? And he said that a lot of conductors become very self-involved. It becomes all about them, and their vision and imprinting of themselves on the music and the musicians. And, there's at that time, this was like the late 1980s, early 1990s. There were still, and to this day, there's a remnant of the dictatorial, you know, man on a box telling everyone what to do part of conducting.
Yeah.
In large part, that has been eradicated by the fact that it doesn't work for our modern society, certainly. There is, in my case, I am so much more interested in the humanity behind the musicians making the music that I know I'm not going to get a good sound or a good response or a good product out of anyone whose first concern is pleasing me or fearing my reaction.
I remember about you a few years ago. You kind of live in this great area, and your husband's very smart, and knows a lot about the sciences, and there's this great intersection of art and science. And a few years ago, you talked at a Rotary meeting that I was at, and you talked about music and the brain and why it works the way it does. And there was a book that you had quoted a lot, and I got that book, and I read about half of it, and then I got distracted. So I'm going to go back to it. But is there anything from your perspective that really kind of strikes you as why music works so well within our brain, and how we're so receptive to it?
Well, in the book and in a lot of the work of other scientists and philosophers and writers, I'm thinking particularly of Oliver Sacks, I think it's Dan Levitin is the author of This Is Your Brain on Music is the book. They discuss how we have now developed the ability in science to actually measure the effect of music on the brain with functional MRIs. And so the thing that really just woke me up, it's not as though I needed convincing that music helps us think better. I personally experience that anytime I'm really doing anything in a focused way, particularly something musical, and I see that effect happen to large groups of people. Even in very stressful situations, we will gather for a rehearsal, particularly, obviously we haven't gathered during the pandemic, but even before then, life was rather exceedingly stressful. And these people would gather and we'd all be talking about all that's going on in our lives, but then we focus on one thing together, making music together as a group. There's no part of that isn't demonstrated to me every day as having a very specific, focusing, calming, positive effect upon the way we think and analyze and use all the different parts of our brain. When I read this book, all of that was verified for me in a very clearly written discussion of all the science behind why. And it's because of how the auditory cortex of our brains work. And the very specific example that blew me away is that in a functional MRI, where an electrode is attached to the brain, if you play a note, like the note we orient ourselves around in an orchestra is the note A, 440 hertz. And I really hope I'm getting it right today. Is this an A? I have no idea. Don't test me. It vibrates at 440 hertz, and the electrode in the brain fires at that same frequency. Even if the person's brain who's being measured couldn't sing the note back to you, their brain registers that frequency. So the comparison is, if you use the visual cortex, put the electrode where, holding up like a red apple would essentially make some part of your brain light up red. That does not happen in the visual cortex. There's no other part of the brain that works quite like this. And where it was applied that drew my interest was in the recovery of Gabby Giffords after she was shot, the congresswoman from Arizona. The thing that made her able to speak again was to sing first. She was able to sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, Row, Row, Row Your Boat, My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean, which when you think about it, that's My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean. All these leaps everywhere. It should be really hard. She was able to do that because the auditory cortex functioned with a melodic line to get her verbal skills back. So it crosses hemispheres in the brain. And why does this happen? I can only trace it back to the fact that we are a musical species. Most animals are. Birdsong, wolves howling, whales singing, dolphins singing. Even my cat has her own strange aria that she sings at 2:00 in the morning for no reason. And those impulses are part of most living creatures, right? And they were certainly part of us as earliest human animals. So for us to not be musical is to go against our very nature as human beings. And so for me, the most important aspect of this interest in neurology as relates to music and the brain and how the brain functions, all of us think musically. It was proven by that functional MRI. But even those of us, I get this all the time when someone says, "Oh, you're a musician and you can sing and that's so great, boy, I can't carry a tune." That's just a technical hurdle to get through if you believe that about yourself. You are musical. We all are. That's why we respond to music we love. And that's why, as anybody who's read the work of Oliver Sacks and his research into music and memory, even the patients who are most compromised by dementia are brought into focus and into the present by a link to their memory through music. So it's like it's our secret superpower. And we have to keep tapping into it. Right now, that is made sort of simultaneously harder for those of us who are group music makers. Like we have to be in a group to do what we do. On the other hand, we suddenly have access to all of these performances on our screens that we would not have previously had access to because we're forced into this weird environment by the pandemic.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answers your question, but to me, it must go back to the fact that from the very beginning of our existence as human beings, we have made music to communicate essential needs.
Well, yeah, and I guess if you think from an evolutionary standpoint, there are sounds that are safe and sounds that are dangerous, and
Yep.
the safe sounds would probably be the birds nearby or things like that, and then the dangerous sounds would be the bear roaring or what. And you think about the sounds that the chalkboard, that fingers and fingernails on the chalkboard that make you hear. So yeah, the sounds do have a very deep reaction for us, and good or bad, right?
They tie into emotion.
Yeah. And I'm also fascinated by like what you talked about, like the 440 megahertz, the frequency, and how mathematical it is between the notes and the frequencies. I heard someone saying the other day, the very earliest universities back in medieval times, music was in the math department because music was considered applied arithmetic.
Yes, well, Pythagoras I can't remember if he played the lyre or the lute or something, but mathematicians many of the most famous ones were musicians themselves.
Yeah.
Either, and not necessarily great musicians. This is not a requirement. Just make music.
Yeah. And I just think that's fascinating, that the connection between music and math
Yeah.
and our evolution and how it all kind of comes together. I took a music theory class in college. I only took one music class in college, and it was really hard. And the professor, what he did was he would give us a piece of music, just one line of notes for 12 bars or whatever it was, and we'd have to write the 4-part harmonies. But we couldn't listen to the music. We couldn't, all you had to know was how the theory worked in the math, and you had to write all the other notes. And then you would give it to him, and he'd play it in front of the whole class, and he would make these faces if you did it wrong. He'd go, oh, that's awful. But if you did it right, and it was just fascinating to me. All I had to know was the theory, the math, and it would sound good. And I just thought that was really cool.
Right, right. Well, and the physics of sound. I mean, in the Bankhead Theater, uh, you enjoy one of the best acoustical environments for a small multi-purpose theater I've ever heard, and it has to have been because someone did the math right, right?
And
Because sounds vibrate at certain frequencies, and it's like there's numbers behind that.
yeah, well, the way the wooden panels are set up around the theater, one thing you'll notice is there's very few right angles in the theater, because right angles are really bad for music. But what I understand is they are movable, and we can adjust those, and they were set up for symphony, for orchestra.
Yep, yep.
And they haven't been moved since. But that's how the original setup was for orchestral music. So
Yep.
if you want
Yay.
to hear a good symphony, come to the Bankhead Theater, and it's definitely designed for that.
Yep.
You've talked about this a little bit. How have the last 10 months been for you, not being able to be with the orchestra and not being able to perform? It must be a real challenge.
Right. Well, and something that, I did, I think I gave you a few desperate phone calls over the past few months of how are you surviving this? Like, not just on an economic level, but when you must have other musicians and artists and collaborators in order to do what you do, it's definitely been very strange. And I know that is not just true of orchestral musicians and conductors, but also of, obviously, of theater companies and ballet companies and music schools everywhere. Anyone in a chorus is particularly hampered. So, it's happened in stages, right? Initially, it was all about, can we continue? What are we able to do safely? That quickly deteriorated to just stop everything. And so we're all forced to figure out how to continue to serve our communities without being able to produce a normal product. For me, that meant and this was mostly about maintaining my integrity musically. There is a wonderful cellist in our orchestra, Alan Copeland, who is also on the board of Del Val Fine Arts, and just an extraordinary man who just so happens to make instruments. He makes violins and cellos, and he lives not far from me. And I called him and said, "Oh my gosh, quick, before we're not allowed to leave our houses, do you have a cello I can borrow?" So I returned to my second instrument, the cello, for the first time in 30 years. And I've been practicing and kind of using myself as an example to keep my own community musicians practicing. Or as my mother would say to her students as a teacher, practice 20 minutes a day no matter what. Just whatever it is, play it for 20 minutes a day. Make yourself do it. Even if you sound terrible, do your chores. Make some kind of music. So I've been trying to follow that to greater or lesser extents. I've been singing more. I'm a singer. That's my first instrument. My husband happens to be quite a good pianist, and he's been practicing. So I have an accompanist. Yay. But as far as my orchestral work, I've been really lucky that many of our musicians have been willing to collaborate and throw themselves out there with me. So our principal wind players, some of our string players, Our percussionist, they've made videos to share with our community on our website, on social media, just 2 or 3 minutes of this is my instrument, this is how it works, this is why I care about what I do, and then playing a little bit. Our board president, Alan Frank, is really adept at audio recording and visual stuff, and he's been putting together some videos. He did something using Copeland's Our Town, which features views of Livermore with a live performance recorded at the bankhead of our orchestra playing that piece, which was quite moving to see. And we've done a sort of a collaboration where we got the orchestra together on camera from their own homes playing Sleigh Ride along with themselves from the previous year's recording. And it's remarkable. We've all seen a lot of Zoom orchestras or Zoom theater or Zoom Broadway or like new ways of collaborating on screen. But when it's your own orchestra and putting that together, it is very meaningful despite the fact that it's so absurdly different than our normal collaborations. By far the most rewarding work we did this fall was the woodwinds and brass players who joined you all in your Vineyard Vibes presentation in August in the middle of, or when we recorded it in the middle of the fire and smoke. That was really rewarding, and I thought a really effective choice on the theater's part to do, which we valued so much. And then later in the summer and fall, I enjoy access to a really large space in my backyard. I'm looking at my back windows right now, and I was able to host rehearsals with the string players of the orchestra, obviously under great rigorous health protocols, to be able to just make music together. And in thinking ahead, we have to think ahead about how to come back and how to maintain ourselves during this period. So, choosing repertoire that allows musicians to safely gather outdoors and play in some way that keeps them in contact with each other. In a way, it hones your skills because you've got to use your ears at this great, 9-foot distance between people. Outside with no acoustic to cradle the sound around your ears. But it was remarkably rewarding and effective to have these short gatherings. And we did do one with woodwinds. They were 16 feet apart. And I had them draping their instruments so that anything that could emit any, we followed all the science to keep everyone safe. And even after a month's long absence from playing together, these woodwind players from 16 feet apart played in tune, in sync. I mean, in a way, it's forcing us to hone our skills in a different way.
Does it sound different when they're so far apart?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not, woodwinds and brass carry better outdoors than strings do. But in all cases, it goes back to what you were asking earlier in our conversation. It comes down to listening. You'd have to change how you're listening. So when I'm a conductor in normal times, and I'm on the podium on the Bankhead Theater stage, I have to listen to the orchestra as if my ears are on the back wall of the theater anyway. I have to really mix the sound in my own head. I'm already mixing it with what I want it to sound like. With what it's actually sounding like. So we all have to develop that skill, and in a way, we're developing it in this new way.
So what's going to change then? So once we do open back up, is anything going to be different? I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are kind of moving forward.
Right. I personally feel, and I've talked with a lot of other artists about this, and from across a wide spectrum, other community orchestra conductors, all the way through to singers and instrumentalists who are soloists who, are normally performing hundreds of concerts a year. There is I think an awareness that the act of making art is more important than the perfection of the delivery of that art. It's not to say we shouldn't have high artistic standards. That's really important to say. That's one of the reasons that it's fun to make music, is to make it better, right? To try to get better at doing it. But we tend to get hung up on, is that the right note? Is that the right interpretation? Was it too fast or too slow? Is the singer in good voice today? Is somebody's facility, gee, they're not as good as they were last time. This is not going to matter as much and for a while, and it shouldn't, because just being able to share a common experience of making music together in a shared space and hearing it together in a shared space is now, we understand, such an incredible privilege. Again, I'm sure my orchestra will quickly, if I say, oh, perfection's out the door, by the 15th minute of the first rehearsal, I'm sure I'll be fixing something, right?
Yeah.
But not for a while. We just need to play.
I think we're all appreciating how much we miss it, and just the opportunity to see anything will be. I think people are really looking forward to that. I keep on my desk, I still have the tickets to the last thing I saw here at the Bankhead, and it was the opera. Was the Florentine Tragedy, and that was the last show that happened before we closed, and it just makes me miss it so much.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to when we can do that again. I was going to ask you, what are you thankful for right now, given everything that's kind of been happening over the last year? It's been tough for anybody working in the arts. What are you kind of grateful for?
Well, on a fundamental level, I'm grateful for my family. I'm trapped in the pandemic with the first three people I would choose to be trapped with: my two kids and my husband. In my professional world, on a personal level, I am really grateful this kind of tragic pandemic did not occur early in my career, or I wouldn't have one.
Yeah.
And one of my big concerns is for, some of the soloists we've presented on the Bankhead stage were literally right at the very, very beginning of their careers. And you're only as good as your last concert, and there haven't been a whole lot of concerts. So I am grateful that this occurred at a time when my ability to develop, I'm always trying to grow and develop as a musician, but my career had already started and grown quite a bit and morphed many times. I can withstand this in my developmental and career process. Much harder for people just starting out, much harder.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful for the creativity of the response of well, we have to reinvent everything and just start over. And, I'm grateful for our school district and the way that they have responded to suddenly having to do all of their collaborative work online in an instant. It's, terribly hard to get it exactly right, but the effort's been astounding. And for many people, it's been very successful. I worry about those folks who don't have the kind of access that you and I are enjoying right now. But fundamentally, I'm grateful for the humanity behind the effort to stay connected. And we have to keep doing it. So, especially now in a very, very disconnected society.
All right. Well, I'm not going to take any more of your time, but I really just want to say how much I appreciate you and what you do in this community for us and for all these wonderful musicians. I know they all miss it and they want to get back here. And it's such a great way to bring the community together. Well, and I want to keep this conversation going, and I think we'll have a lot more to talk about. Next time we do this, you're going to have to play the cello, by the way.
Oh, God.
So get ready.
Okay. Well, we'll find the right audio filter for that. Yeah.
Yeah. But thank you, Lara, and have a great day. And we'll see you soon at the Bankhead Theater.
Thanks, Chris. Looking forward to being back.